Hi, this is Bruce Whipple, and welcome to the Business Acquisition Podcast. This is where we talk about how to acquire an already profitable business rather than build one from scratch. In the past 25 years, I've acquired several businesses, and I've also built several businesses from scratch. And I can tell you that it's a lot easier to do the former rather than the latter. You may know me from my association with Dan Pena, who I've worked with and been partners with for more than 25 years. Dan is gracious enough to mention me quite often in his videos, and it's been a real pleasure working with Dan, and one of the few people that I call a true friend. And actually, we've worked on many acquisitions together as well. And even though I said it was easier to acquire a business rather than build one from scratch, that doesn't necessarily mean it's easy. I often say that QLA is simple, but please don't make the mistake of thinking that simple is the same thing as easy. It still requires hard work. There's an old saying, no news is good news. And I bet you we've all heard that, and I could not disagree more with that statement. Usually, no news is bad news, and oftentimes very bad news. It's funny, we all pass on good news almost instantly. But bad news, we think, well, maybe it'll get better, maybe I'll be embarrassed to pass it on, whatever the reason is, but we tend to hold on to bad news far, far too long. And I'm an optimistic guy, certainly, but erring on the side of taking action and recognizing when you have a problem is almost always better. Certainly recognizing that you have a problem is always better. But what are you going to do to solve it? Most of the time, left in the dark, a problem will not solve itself. So you preclude options if you hold on to it rather than talk to your advisors, talk to your professionals, let them know the situation, and then work on a solution. There's always a solution that I've seen, almost always, maybe not always. But let me give you some examples of that. I had responsibility for 5 divisions where we had what we call rolling forecasts. And in those rolling forecasts, every quarter, we would set up what the sales were going to be for the quarter. And rather than wait until the end of the quarter, this rolling forecast every week would be updated. And we called that a gap analysis. And it was just a reflection of what were the sales so far, what orders are due to come in, what manufacturing problems are there, which meant that if we had an order and couldn't fulfill it, we had to take that out of the expected revenue. And ultimately, you came up with a gap analysis. Again, the gap was to the rolling forecast revenue number. I can't ever remember seeing where we did have a positive gap. There were always negative gaps. So we always had to find additional ways to put revenue in. But I remember one instance where we had a particularly troubled division, and we set a rolling forecast, looked good. Literally the night before the quarter ended, the evening before, I got a phone call that said we're going to miss by $1 million, which was a pretty significant number in this business. Now, did they know that they had a problem before that? Yeah, I think they did. Did they know that it was a problem because they weren't going to finish some manufacturing schedules on time? Yeah, I think they knew that too. But they thought somehow, some way, that would get fixed and that they would be able to make up that difference. That was totally false thinking. In reality, there was no way they could make that up. So I got the call that we're going to miss by $1 million. It was unacceptable to miss by $1,000. So I had to make phone calls to clients, ask for additional orders. And we had one customer in particular that you could usually go to, cut a deal, and end up shipping some additional products. So we were able to close that gap. But had we known earlier, we could have done an awful lot more things to manage that situation. So not raising your hand, not telling that there's a problem, precluded options. The other one that just about everybody has heard about is L.B. Burke. If you've listened to Dan Pena's information, she had a mobile home park business. She did most everything right. She was straight out of college, Cornell. She was smart. She was aggressive. She raised $1 million from some very savvy real estate investors. She was able to do a series of transactions in the mobile home park business quickly, eventually culminating in about a $10 million Florida mobile home park acquisition across 5 mobile home parks. Dan talked about her a lot in what she was doing, how successful she was. But when she got into problems, and she got into problems because she didn't have the expertise to manage them, she thought, well, everybody says I'm doing such a great job. I can't tell people I'm not doing such a great job. I probably believe that she tried to think that she would figure it out, which she really couldn't on her own. So eventually she had trouble with taxing authorities, loan payments, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, and basically ran that acquisition into a brick wall eventually. So again, not raising your hand for whatever reason, in that case it was embarrassment and self-image problems, puts you in a position where you can't have time to solve the problem. Eventually, Dan and I did operate that business. We fixed a lot of those problems, but the damage in large part was already done. And the same thing is true with things like collection notices, overdue payments, etc. A lot of times people don't give an update to those people, and then they're forced to take action. Whereas if you had a discussion, and all of us that are entrepreneurs have been in a situation where we haven't been able to pay things on time, we needed to get some breathing room, eventually able to pay them, but maybe not in the time frame that other people wanted them to be paid. So if you ignore it, eventually those creditors will take action on their own, whether that's they'll turn it over to collections, they will file a lawsuit, any number of things. Whereas if you had communicated, explained the problem, what you were doing to solve it, most times you would be in a position where you could reach some sort of an agreement with that person. So I've seen this an awful lot in the last couple of months for some reason, where people are afraid to raise their hand in a timely fashion, say they're in trouble, and work on a solution. And I would just encourage you that there are always problems. And I want to include here a clip from Dan, audio clip from the 1990s when he talks about exactly that. The first part of it is just a positive message, but the second is how businesses always have problems. So don't think that you're unique in that regard, but please address those absolutely as soon as you can. Get the help you need, and most of the time in these situations, there is a solution if you have the time and you have the talent around you to be able to think what those solutions are. If nothing more, then it may give you the opportunity before an impending deadline to buy some more time, essentially. So it's really important. Again, good news, we'll fire off an email instantly to let people know that. Bad news, not so much. So I think if you'll adopt the philosophy of do it now, address it now, get the right people involved, you will be in a much, much better position than if you don't do that and basically let events unfold on their own. You don't control them in that situation. So here is a blast from the past. Dan Pena in the 1990s talking about exactly this subject, the second part of which is how businesses always have troubles.
The objective, to replace fear with passion. That should be your objective moving forward. And as my good partner Bruce Whipple would say, I'm increasing my risk and stretching my comfort zone on a daily basis. Risk doesn't scare me anymore. I have replaced fear with faith. I find the two emotions can't exist at the same time. And I agree, and I couldn't agree more. And for those of you, a couple of you have met Bruce. Bruce is my, for the lack of a better term, clean-up hatchet man. He goes into business ventures that for whatever reason go wrong, and they always go wrong, and he fixes them. And that's what he does, and that's what he does very well. He looks at a problem, like if during the bombing of London during the war, he'd look at this, he'd be climbing over the debris with Churchill and say, God, what a great opportunity for an engineer here. Geez, I can't believe, look at all the stuff we got to rebuild. I just look at all the damn rubble and God, what with all the headaches. To him, the glass is always half full and not half empty. And by the way, if you're ever in business with me and you see Whipple walk in the door, it's because you're walking out the door. Just remember that. It's because you're exiting. Because he doesn't come along to pass you on the bum and say, what a good job you're doing. He's there to cut your heat off.
Okay, so if you have any questions or comments or ideas for future episodes, please email bruce@brucewhipple.com. And if you're not already on our mailing list, head over to brucewhipple.com and sign up and grab any of the free reports. That'll put you on the mailing list. There is a lot of free information you can use to acquire already profitable businesses. This is Bruce Whipple. Thanks for listening to the Business Acquisition Podcast. And remember, you miss 100% of the opportunities you fail to take. And procrastination truly is the thief of time. So do something today, please. Your future self will be proud of you.